Hello and welcome to Bible study. Today, my name is Olajumoke, and today we're going to be diving into the book of Judges, chapter 1. Now, the book of Judges contains one or two, maybe more, of the wildest stories in the Bible. Judges also is a record of some of the roughest times the children of Israel had. But here's the thing: if self punishment and self sabotage was a book, it will be Judges. And we will see why as we go through the chapters. Along, we'll be sharing in depth insights. I would like you to pay attention, please, because believe it or not, these things apply to our lives even today. Let no one deceive you or pull the wool over your eyes that the Bible is outdated. The wisdom in the Bible is ancient, it is timeless, and it applies to our lives even today and in our walk with God. So in the book of Judges, we have the children of Israel who have now settled into Canaan. There, the inhabitants of those lands, who are sometimes collectively referred to as the Amorites, they had acted very wickedly over the years, and according to God, their cup of wickedness was full. They worshipped all manner of gods and idols, and they polluted the land with them, doing things like making sacrifices, such as burning their children alive to Baals and demon gods like Molech. And so God drove them out and dispossessed them of the land. Remember that according to Psalm 24 verse 1, the earth is the Lord's and his fullness thereof. So he gave Israel this assignment. They were to go up to war against these people, drive them out completely, dispossess them of their land, and burn down the altars of their idols. The reason God asked them to be completely driven out was that if they did not do that, the same demon gods which caused them to sin would be a trap. It would be a snare. The word snare means trap. It would be a trap unto the children of Israel. Now, from the first chapter of Judges, Israel did as they were told, and they began to possess the land. But later we see that they left it off, and the consequences were nasty and tragic. And I think they still face some of those consequences today. So let's dive into chapter 1 without further ado. Okay, so let's read the first few verses of chapter 1. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. So Judah said to Simeon his brother, come up with me to my allotted territory, that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their hand, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. The story goes on to recount how God used them to execute judgment against one wicked king who used to cut off the thumbs and big toes of other kings, make them crawl on their hands and knees and beg for food under his table. Okay, so that's that. Now, moving on through verses 8 to 9, we see the children of God possess some of those lands: Canaan, Jerusalem, Hebron, and so on and so forth. But they did not complete the assignments, and the sad parts of this chapter begins from verse 27. Let's have a look. However, Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites were determined to dwell in that land. And it came to pass, when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites under tribute, but did not completely drive them out. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, so the Canaanites dwelt in Gezer among them. Nor did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, or the inhabitants of Nahalol, so the Canaanites dwelt among them and were put under tribute. And so on. Other tribes, were also listed as not having driven out the inhabitants, but they put them under tribute. Okay, so this tribute thing, we'll come to it later. It's a really important point, and there are deep lessons there that we can apply to our lives today. We'll come to it in a while. So overall, this was the story of chapter 1, an incomplete assignment. God had given them the instruction, drive these people out. But we see from verse 27 to 36 that they kind of compromise on accomplishing this assignment. And one of the most painful verses in chapter is in verse 34, where the Amorites had forced the tribe of Dan into the mountains. They won't even allow them come down. Right. So let's go into the insights. Number one insight is the matter of this incomplete assignment, or should I say, remixed assignment, right? So God gave them something to do, and they started out, well, fair enough, but they not only did not complete it, they left it incomplete, but then they now remixed it. And how did they remix it? Instead of driving those people out, the children of Israel, they decided to let's compromise by letting them stay instead. And, we'll just make them pay. We'll make them pay tribute. Let's dive into it and see how that applies today. What they did not remember, of course, was that God had judged the Amorites for their wickedness, and God had spat them out of the land. And they were meant to be the executors of that wickedness. But what they did not understand, and this is the thing, when God asks us to do something, He's the one who sees all of eternity. You can only see, so many times we can't even see beyond our noses. You don't know what tomorrow holds, but God knows, So by doing this, eventually Israel themselves began to share in the curse of the Amorites. Because hundreds of years later, God spat them out of that same land, just the way He had spat out the Amorites. Because their demon gods started, they were seduced by the demon gods into idolatry, and they started acting in evil ways, the same way the people God had chased out were acting. They started acting. So they shared in the curse eventually. So this is the first practical insight and lesson. When the Lord asks us to do something, honestly, sometimes it might not make logical sense, and we like logic a lot. But let's just do it. Remember, you don't have all the entire picture, but we can trust Him. Let our desire always be to obey Him. And where it is hard, whenever the instruction seems hard, or it seems difficult, or it seems uncomfortable, we can always ask for His help in prayer. A request for help to obey God is one request that He never denies, So we are not to remix it or do it in our own self, in a way that we think it's right. And this brings us to the issue of tribute, which we mentioned earlier, and brings us to the second lesson as well. Now, what is tribute? In those days, tribute simply meant, a non-negotiable payment levied by one country to another country. Taxes, A stronger nation can enforce it on a weaker nation as a bargain to not invading them or letting them leave. And of course, tributes were heavy, and they could dictate any payment form they liked. The terms of payment could, run from gold, cattle, silver, whatever, To put it simply, tribute in those days was like, okay, yeah, I can choose to bully you. We are stronger than you are, we are stronger than you are, and you know it, so we can squash you. But let's just leave you alone. However, every year, you and your people, your king, must give us a certain number of gold, a certain number of silver, and so on and so forth. Whatever they demanded. And the weaker nation, of course, they would usually comply, because one, they were weaker, and they knew that the alternative was not pleasant at all. So it was a kind of trade-off. So here is Israel, who God gave the instruction that drive these people off the land, burn their altars, make no covenant with them. But Israel comes up with what they thought was a more practical way, a smarter way, and they ended up paying very dearly for this. They ended up paying dearly for it, because the idols of those people became a trap for themselves. Now, the problem with this tribute business and what Israel did was that they were applying, quote and unquote, the wisdom of the world. Instead of just obeying God's instruction, they chose to trade with it. And I'm sure it must have sounded logical at that time. Okay, instead of just chasing them out, let's tax them, let's make them pay tributes. It will pay our economy, it will give us some extra money, it will give us free food, free money, free gold, and all of that. They're scared of us, so we can make these demands and they will pay up. At that time, it must have seemed like an excellent trade-off. Maybe something that will even be great for their economy. However, the wisdom of this world will always be a trap. The Bible says, there's a way that seems right unto a man, but the end thereof is destruction. The end thereof is destruction. Let money not be a driver, or resource be a driver for our decisions. Because listen, it's very easy to criticize the Israelites when we read the Bible. But let's stop for a minute and look at ourselves. How many times has God asked us to do something and then we rationalize it? We try to, do it in a way that makes sense to us. Maybe the way He told you to do it, it didn't quite make sense to you, so you decided to remix it. It doesn't end well. It never ends well. We cannot make decisions based on money, on resource, or our own mental mathematics. And many times in our lives, we'll come to a crossroads where we must make a choice. And if money is the driver for those choices, it does not end well. If money is the only driver if money is the primary driver for those, it doesn't end well. Let God be the one. Let He be the major consideration when you make decisions, and when He gives us instructions, please just do it the way He says you should do it. Don't remix and all of that. The third lesson we can draw from this is found in the first few verses. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of the Lord, the third lesson we can draw from this is found in the first few verses of chapter 1. Now, after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. Indeed, I have delivered the land into his hand. Now, we know from the book of Genesis that Judah means praise, and all through the Bible, we see that Judah always goes first. Praise goes first. So, whatever it is we're doing, praise goes first. That is also a very good reminder and insight from this lesson. Our Father who art in heaven. And not just that, we see Jesus himself set that pattern. Jesus himself set that pattern in Luke 11, 1-19, where the disciples asked him to teach them how to pray. And he says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And so you see that pattern, the Lord himself setting that pattern of praise going first. And we also see this in Psalm 100 verse 4, which says, enter his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. All right. So like I said, the book of Judges is very interesting stories, some nasty ones, but it's also one book which is heavily loaded with wisdom and insights, which is very applicable to our lives, which you can learn from in our walk with God. So let's drink deep from God's word. Please hit the subscribe button. Follow me as we dive into the book of Judges. Thank you for joining me, and God bless you.